Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Now this episode is a little different, so before we begin, a warning. The episode contains strong language and deals with the topic of bereavement and emotionally challenging experiences. If that's not something you're in the right space for now, you might want to come back to it later. Because on this episode, I'm exploring grief. It's something that almost all of us will experience at some point, and yet something we still seem remarkably bad at talking about because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't really have a shared language for it, at least not in English. We struggle with how long it lasts, how unpredictable it is, and even to find the words to speak to people who are experiencing it themselves. My guest on the episode is Amy Kean. She's been on the show before, talking about effective communication. And if you haven't listened to that conversation, I'd really recommend going back to it. There's a link in the show notes. Since discovering Amy on LinkedIn, she's had a huge influence on the way that I think. I've been consistently inspired by her willingness to be unashamedly herself, to think out loud, to challenge assumptions, and to talk honestly about things that many of us tend to avoid. When she first came onto the show, she was everything I'd hoped for in a guest. Thoughtful, human, funny, curious, and completely authentic. So I'd already been thinking about seeing how I could get her back onto the show. And when she recently lost her father, Lord Terence Kean, Amy shared how she was feeling on LinkedIn in a way that stopped me in my tracks, because it wasn't performative or polished. It was just reflective, honest, and quietly powerful. And that felt like it opened the door to a much bigger conversation about grief, compassion, and how we give people space to be human when life collides with professional expectations. Given what Amy does, helping people find their voice and speak more openly, and given how thoughtful she is about her own experiences, she felt like exactly the right person to explore this subject with. So I asked her if, when the time was right, she'd be willing to share her experiences on the show, in part to help others, but also as a fitting tribute to her father, to whom this episode is dedicated. Amy immediately said yes, and this is what we recently recorded. Now, this isn't a tightly structured conversation. As is often the case on the show, I just let the conversation flow. But given this particular subject matter and the personal nature of it, I really wanted to just let Amy share the thoughts she wanted to share with the rest of us. So we begin with grief, but then move quickly into related areas. Compassionate return to work, what actually helps when someone is struggling and what really doesn't, and why talking about difficult things might be one of the most important human skills to develop. I just wanted to let Amy talk, reflect, and explore the dynamics in a very human way. That makes this an unusual episode, but I think a really important one. My hope is that if you've experienced loss, this conversation can provide some comfort and perhaps a sense that you're not alone. If you haven't, I hope it offers some insight and maybe a few useful ways to show up better for other people when the time comes. And above all, I hope it helps normalise that we should talk about these things. I'm Christian, and this is the Human Risk Podcast, and it's my conversation with Amy Kean on the topic of grief. Amy, welcome back to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you. The Human Risk Podcast was one of my most my most favourite podcasts I've ever done.
Wow.
It made me famous.
That is absolutely amazing. And look, you were such a pleasure to have on the show last time. I was looking for a reason to get you back. And unfortunately, the reason that I've got you back isn't the nicest of reasons. You've recently suffered a bereavement and you wrote some incredible things about it online. And you've been kind enough to say that you'd come onto the show to talk a little bit about that. It's a subject that we don't often talk about, but will affect all of us. And so to start us off, tell us a little bit about your dad who passed recently.
Lord Terence Bernard Kean is his name. I call him Lord because that's his official title. A few Christmases ago, I bought him a very small piece of land in Scotland. Cost about 50 quid. And that meant that he could call himself Lord Terence Kean. And what was amazing about that was I found it hilarious and he found it really uncomfortable and awkward because he definitely wasn't a lord. He was a Cockney, born in Shoreditch before it was cool. He left school at 15. He joined the army. He didn't go to university. He didn't go to college. He worked as an electrician for British Rail for his entire career. He was very much an ordinary man. But alongside his ordinariness, he was also one of the funniest men I ever met, one of the most caring and sensitive men. He was incredibly progressive, so I can thank him for all of my views on the world, my keen interest in politics. And he was, in a world where men aren't great often. He was my beacon. And even to the extent, since he passed away, and he passed away maybe 3 months ago now, I feel less safe because he had my location on his phone and would check it all the time just to make sure that I was okay. He was just a really giving, loving, ordinary man, and the world is less good because he's gone.
He's obviously hugely influenced you and obviously very proud of what you did. And I think that's
Yeah.
super interesting because you've got an unconventional career.
Mm.
And lots of parents might look at that and go, well, that's not a proper job. My sense is from what you've written about it that he wasn't thinking.
He was so proud of both me and my sisters. So the three of us are, God, you could call us relentlessly ambitious. We like to be overachievers. And I don't think that he instilled that in us. He just made it very, very clear that he was happy whatever we did. Whether we got married or not, whatever our sexuality was, it didn't matter. Wherever we chose to live, whatever job we picked in our careers, it didn't matter as long as we were happy with it. And I think when you have a parent like that, that doesn't judge you, I never felt judged by either of my parents, actually. You could go one of two ways. You could just do fuck all for your entire life, and that is also a choice. Or you push yourself, and it actually feels nicer because all the pressure that you have is self-inflicted rather than coming from your parents, which can create incredibly toxic relationships. So he was very proud. And what I think he loved about my career, I can't speak for my sisters, but what he liked about my career is that I was constantly surprising him. He didn't like it. I lived in Singapore for 3 years. He hated that. But at least he could say to the people down the gym, my daughter's moved to Singapore. She lives in Singapore. He loved the fact that I had a book that had the word fuck in the title. He watched my TED talk the entire time. Most of my views, I think. He died before he got to see my second one. He died before my TED talk about weirdness came out. But my first TED talk, which is about gravitas, he's probably contributed to 90% of the views. I kept him on his toes, and I think he was he was entertained by that.
And is there a sense, I mean, you like challenging the establishment, not just for the sake of it, but where you see injustice. And I presume a lot of that comes from him as well.
And my mum as well. They're just what I love about the pair of them is that they were working class in the way that we know and love it in Britain. Salt of the earth, very hardworking, highly opinionated, brilliant, community driven working class people. And at a time when it was, I don't know, the working class in the UK has been through a right old journey, hasn't it, in the last 30, 40 years? But uh, all of their beliefs and their work ethic and all of that stuff and how friendly they were and how kind they were that's what I got from them.
And moving into the recent events, when he passed, was that sudden or was it expected over a period of time?
So what's really interesting is that grief wise, I'm kind of double parked because my mum has very advanced dementia, and that's been escalating for the past 2 or so years. And it's got to the stage now where she doesn't know me. She doesn't know me. She can't recognize me. And so if I go in to see her, she's in a home now. She has to be in a home in an advanced dementia ward. Sometimes she gets distressed because she recognizes me in a way. So she sort of knows that my energy is familiar, but she doesn't know who I am. So that distresses her quite a lot. So it's really hard to go and visit her. I've been dealing with that preemptive grief for the last 2, 3 years, which in and of itself is a struggle. It's a very specific flavor of grief. And my dad was her carer. And was in at the age of 87. He was 87, still with it, completely still with it, exercised all the time, really healthy. We thought what would happen was she would pass away and then my dad would have a few years to live again. That's what we all assumed would happen. But then completely out of the blue, and I think it was on the 2nd of August, the 1st or 2nd of August, he had a stroke. Completely out of the blue. My sister was there and she saw it happen. It was a very, very severe stroke. So he was immediately paralyzed. They attempted surgery, but it didn't go amazingly because it was such a massive stroke. Completely out of the blue. And then we spent 2, 3 months visiting him in hospital every single day, desperately hoping that he might improve. And I didn't realize until he had a stroke that loads of people do. I didn't realize how common it was. And so when I just said it on Instagram, I think, in my stories, loads of my friends got in touch saying, "Oh my God, my dad had a stroke. My nan had a stroke." So many people know someone who had a stroke I never had before. And I heard so many stories from people saying, and my dad was fine 2 weeks later. My nan was okay after 3 months. She learned to walk again, etc. And I um heard a phrase for the first time, which I think is really common, which is it's the hope that kills you. For 2 to 3 months, we were living in hope that he would get better because sometimes he'd be talking and sometimes he'd wake up. And the NHS, the doctors and the consultants were adamant that he was going to die and kept telling us repeatedly he's going to die. Obviously, we didn't really want to believe that, but then they made a decision to stop feeding him through a tube and stop essentially giving him any medication, and he went downhill rapidly from there. Was taken to palliative care, taken to a care home, which was grotesque, disgusting, a disgusting place. And there's a whole other subject about the lack of integrity that old people are afforded in modern Britain, which we can talk about another day. But so it was very out of the blue, but then I had 2 or 3 months to see it coming.
Clearly, it's something that theoretically one might like to try and prepare for. But I'm assuming, and I say this not having gone through it myself with my parents, I'm assuming it's something that you can't really prepare for. It doesn't matter how mentally adjusted you are. I'm assuming it's just going to hit you,
Yeah.
even if you have tried to do everything you can to prepare for it.
It's different with Alzheimer's, I would say. With my mum, even though she's still alive, to a large extent, I've mourned her. I've mourned her as she was. Now her body is a mere vessel and she is no longer there. That preemptive mourning has taken 2 years, but I think I've done it. With my dad, I think hope is the most annoying emotion. Because it gets to the stage where you almost fear hope because every single day, any single sign that he was getting better was a wholehearted, was a absolute sign that he was going to be cured, he was going to recover. And so I refused to prepare for it until the day he died. There was still a hope that there might be some kind of miracle and he would get better. Obviously he didn't.
And talk to me a bit about you're self-employed.
Yes.
Obviously, for people in quote unquote normal jobs, you just get given time off.
Yeah.
That's obviously much more problematic given you are the business.
It Yeah, it's something that I'd never thought about when I started the business. But when you're self-employed and you're either caring or grieving, it's a massive pain in the ass. Also, I started a master's at LSE in September. So I'm on campus 3 days a week. So I was running a business, doing a master's, caring for my dying dad every single day. Whilst also my job, I run a company called Good Shout. We provide training in communications, how to listen, how to create, etc., like human skills. It requires a lot of performing. It requires being at the top of my game. You've got an entire room of people that you have to teach and entertain at the same time. I still had to be 10 out of 10 for all the people that I was training. I had to run a workshop the day after my dad died because there was no one else to do it. And so I just have to go into this mode where it was like, okay, literally forget everything else and just flick a switch. And that's the really tricky thing, is that I was in hospital every single day for 2 or 3 months visiting him, also visiting my mum every single day because she had a living carer, but also we had to help her transition to a different life, and then desperately had to try and take some kind of compassionate leave for myself after he died. And all I was able to do was take 2 weeks. 2 weeks is nothing. You don't in the 2 weeks that follows, the grief doesn't even really occur because there's a weird adrenaline and everyone's lovely to you. And you get loads of hugs and you get loads of flowers. And the crying doesn't really kick in until about a month later. And so struggling now. I'm struggling now. We're 3 months in and I don't know how I'm going to be from one day to the next. This is the unpredictability of grief. Anything can make me cry. My boyfriend and I were talking about spaghetti bolognese the other day. That was the food that was the meal that my dad would make me every time I went home. I started crying and I couldn't stop talking about spaghetti bolognese. So anything, I have to be so careful in workshops, meetings, because I'm terrified that something's going to set me off. That's the stuff. Navigating that, the fragility, the sensitivity of grief, the unpredictability of grief, that's the shit that we don't talk about enough.
And I guess, when you talk about sort of having to appear and be you, I mean, your business, it's not just that you run the business, it's you, right? You
Yeah.
are the face of it, and you're very authentic in the way that you do that, right? There
Yeah.
isn't a sort of work Amy and then a private one, right?
Yeah.
You put yourself out there,
Yeah.
and that's the strength of the business.
Yeah.
And so in a way, you're not somebody. One of the reasons I love talking to you and being inspired by you is that you're not somebody who puts on a show, right? You are just unashamedly you. And
Mm.
so that must be really interesting to sort of have to show up as the authentic version of you, the thing that people have bought into,
Yeah.
in a way that I guess normally would be effortless for you. I'm not saying you don't put any effort into what you do, but you're not having to fake it. And
Yeah.
yet this is a situation where you kind of are, right? You're having to bring that Amy where the real one, I guess, wouldn't be able to perform. So you're having to put on a performance in a way that you wouldn't normally.
What I've been doing is making sure that at least one or two people in every room knows that I'm grieving. I'm really loud about what I'm going through. And I always have been, actually. In periods of my life when I've been depressed, I've never hidden it. I don't tend to hide my emotions. I make sure that someone in the room, if not everyone in the room, knows that I'm grieving. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, just in case something sets me off and I have to breathe for a second or I have to step back for a second. If I'm able to do that and I feel safe, then actually I'm fine. The second reason is so that no one gives me any unnecessary shit. Because when you work in the learning and development business, sometimes there's not a huge amount of respect in the room. If you're teaching people how to be a better leader, or if you're teaching people how to do public speaking and they get really nervous, sometimes people can really act up and they can be really disruptive or rude. Obviously, in this job, you learn how to navigate that and you learn how to pacify people, etc. But I also make sure people know, so that they know my tolerance for their bullshit is zero. And so with that, with that's my boundaries, my ground rules, it's kind of okay. One of the things, and it's a weird parallel, but I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of conferences and I still get nervous. I really feel nerves. You can see my atoms. I shake and all that jazz, but I've learned how to ride it. Sometimes if I'm really nervous, I'll just say to the audience, I'm feeling nervous that day. Because as soon as you name an emotion and as soon as you put yourself out there, all of a sudden you're disabling it. All of a sudden you're giving that emotion less power. And I think it works in loads of different instances.
I think that's super interesting because I mean, I have a theory that doing presentations, one ought to be slightly nervous
Yes.
because it's not a normal thing, right? It's like
No.
it's like sort of standing in front of a particularly larger crowd of people. It's like it's not a normal activity. And so
Yeah.
if we're not nervous, I kind of think we're phoning it in because we're sort of not engaging the room. I think recognizing this is not a is a powerful thing. And I love this idea of calling things out, which is very you, right? Just like here's the thing I'm going through. I'm going to put that out there in a way that loads of other people wouldn't.
Yeah.
And this is why I think this topic is a really interesting vehicle to look at your whole approach because you kind of don't hold back. You put things out there. And I'm guessing that must be quite cathartic. And when you've got something like the experience that you've been through, then that's going to be even more powerful, right? Because the emotions are even stronger.
It's something that I've never been able to do. What I've realized about myself is that there is nothing that anyone could ever say that would make me feel uncomfortable. So if I said to you, unless it was like, about pedophilia or some kind of horrible sexual urge, but even then, the world's a murky place. But if I said to you now, how are you doing? And you said, you know what? I felt suicidal yesterday. I was struggling beyond belief. I thought, what's the point? There is nothing about that would make me uncomfortable. There is nothing anyone could say or anyone could reveal to me that would make me feel awkward in that situation. And I quite like that. I didn't realize it was anomalous, but I quite like that, and I almost try to enforce it on other people because I think it results in better relationships and better conversations. Let me say the uncomfortable thing because it's gonna bring us closer. You'll get to know me better, and also you can get over some of that weird shit that means that you won't allow people to talk about their emotions in public. So I wonder whether it's almost a test. I'm so open. I never lie about, I'd never exaggerate my emotions, but I'm so open about how I'm feeling just to see how the other person handles it. And I really hope they do handle it.
And I mean, that takes us nicely to the fact that you decided to, I take it you decided to, you probably just did it, right? There wasn't a subconscious thought, but you decided to share your grief on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I thought that was super interesting because it's not something, we see lots of people will sort of talk about the fact that they've lost someone, but they won't go into the level of detail that you did. And given
Yeah.
what you've just explained, it makes perfect sense. And it's back to your point, it's incredibly anomalous. It's not something we usually see. And you got quite a few reactions along those lines, I guess.
That phrase that people love throwing around, be kind because you never know what others are going through. I feel like that's such a wet. I do get the sentiment, but also fucking ask then. Like, if you care that much about what other people are going through, ask. And there's a couple of reasons why I was so keen to talk about my grief. The first is, again, going back to my mum with Alzheimer's, that was the last 2 years navigating that with her have probably been more traumatic than my dad passing away, I would say, because you're trying to navigate the NHS, which is a shit show. I know we're supposed to worship the NHS and applaud them every Thursday, but it is a shit show. So navigating the NHS, navigating local councils, even trying to get a diagnosis when so many people's parents have Alzheimer's these days is impossible. Worrying from one day to the next if she's gone missing again, worrying if she's got angry, wondering if she's tried to hit someone again. Navigating all of that stuff day by day for the last 2 years was much harder. And all I wanted was for someone to give me some fucking grace, for someone to ease off, or for someone, but even an ill parent, we're not permitted to talk about it. It's not okay for us to say, you know what, I don't really like you speaking to me like that in this meeting because I'm going through a really hard time. And so that had been bubbling away for 2 years. And then my dad died. And I thought, fucking hell, like, I'm just going to talk about this because I am in agony here. Like, all of those words that I'd never used to describe myself before, like anguish, agony, turmoil, pain, like all of these words were just so fucking applicable to me. And I thought, I need to say this out loud. I need to say it out loud because what I realize now, knowing how common grief is, we're all going to feel it in our lives, is that most people are in agony. in some way. And it might be the loss of a parent, it might be the loss of a child, it might be the loss of a partner, it might be a long-term illness, cancer. Most people are in agony somehow. And that doesn't mean that they can't live their daily lives and be perfectly pleasant and get their jobs done. But also, let's fucking talk about it.
The bit I loved was there was just this beautiful, like, I'm going to do this, and I don't care what you think, and this is going to help me.
Yeah.
And the implicit criticism of what are you doing on LinkedIn when you should be, I don't know what it was you were supposed to be doing when you weren't on LinkedIn. I read some of these things. I just was like, I think it's really interesting because actually what you're doing is perfectly sensible. Is you're letting feelings out. You're doing it in a space that you normally, you weren't sort of joining a new network to have a sort of public rant. This is your space, right? This is
Yeah.
what you normally do. And so I found it really, one, I found it refreshing because I hadn't seen anybody do it. But two, I just thought it was just remarkably you. And then three, I was fascinated by the response. People couldn't tell you not to do it, but there was clearly a sort of like, what is she doing?
Yes. There were some people that said, don't you think that you should take some time off from LinkedIn while you're going through this? And I was like, no, because what I'm doing when I'm not on LinkedIn is sitting in my fucking bedroom crying. Like, I do that enough. This is the distraction, bitch. This is the good. And how awful is that? LinkedIn is my happy place right now.
But there's a lot of kind of like, this isn't nobody said it, I don't think, but
Yeah.
because there was a weird thing because normally when people put Facebooky type things on LinkedIn, and there are some awful examples of it, right? Stuff where I go, I don't know what you're doing with that stuff here, but like, it's not for me to tell you how to use the platform, but I kind of go, that's a bit weird. But this I thought was a perfectly legitimate thing. To your point, it's impacting other people, but there was still this kind of like, this isn't Facebook type thinking.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, as I looked at it, I was like, this couldn't be more relevant to people's business. So if you took the line of this is a business platform, we should about business things, I was like, well, it is. It's super relevant to that, right? It's not some pouty photo on a a bikini on a beach type thing. This is genuinely you talking about heartfelt. That will impact all of us at work, unsurprisingly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought it was bang on brand for LinkedIn in many respects.
Well, also, work is the place where grief is tackled the worst. I guess I'm lucky in the sense that I don't work for an organization. And so I didn't have to go through the awkwardness of returning to work after compassionate leave and having some people mention it and some people ignore it. I have loads of friends who've returned to work after that period and they just hated it because no one at work knows how to handle a grieving individual and all the complexities that come with that and the fact that everybody grieves in their own way. And someone on LinkedIn, there was a couple of things that were really interesting though, when I posted about it, was that I had a bunch of comments of people going, yep, me too, me too, me too. My dad died 3 weeks ago. My mum died 2 months ago. Like, so you realize that everyone is hurting. And I think that was a really nice excuse for a lot of people to share it. But the second thing is that someone, I can't remember his name and that's really shitty, but he recommended that instead of having, well, as well as having compassionate leave, we should have compassionate return because that's the most important part. People at modern workplaces, this should be the law, some kind of rule, some kind of best practice. People returning to work should have a program that they go through that compassionately enables them to weave back into working life. 50% of your meetings in the 3 weeks of your return, sessions with a counselor for a month after your return. Someone talks to your team to give them advice on how to handle you. A compassionate return would be far more sensitive and impactful than the 2 fucking weeks that you get to mourn the loss of your parent.
I just love that idea because if we think about other situations, right? Induction, you're gently brought into the organization because it's a weird place for you, right?
Yeah.
We think about people with physical disability. We try and change the work. We don't do it well all the time, but there's an attempt to try and get the workplace to be more accommodating. And I think there's a really interesting point here because it would be strange if somebody were to sort of just pop back, oh, everything's normal, because it's not, right? They've just been through this thing. That's why you've had the time off. So I love that idea, and I think we should just it's almost like it's a blindingly obvious point,
Mm.
and I think it would also help because to your point around talking about it. So even if you've not experienced it yourself, if you have had somebody guide you, somebody on your team is going to be coming back, this is how they might be feeling, this is what you think about, that's going to help you. And it's going to normalize talking about it. So I think there's knock-on benefits, not just to the individual involved, but to everybody else as well. I mean, complex to do, challenging, but it's kind of what we should be doing.
Absolutely. I'm obsessed with the idea of making workplaces more human. I'm not the first person to say that, but the idea of being human centric is a cliche these days. But to have something like a compassionate return would be a very human thing to do. There's also there's a huge amount of symptoms that accompany grief, a severe exhaustion because you've been in fight or flight for so long. There's a really dramatic exhaustion, the likes of which I have never felt before. There's a bunch of neuroscientific studies about the impact of grief on your brain, and some people suggest that it's like a brain damage. It affects your brain in so many different ways. It fucks your memory. Really tiny, like cognitive things like that are hugely impacted after and during grief. That's stuff that is going to directly impact your work and how you work with those around you. In the same way that an illness would, a regular illness would, a broken leg, etc. All of these things are going to affect how you show up. And any kind employer, not even kind, any employer that gives any kind of shits would think about that. In my university, they weren't quite as equipped emotionally to deal with a grieving human. And I went back and no one said a fucking word. I was allowed 3 weeks off for 3 weeks off lectures, and I went back and not a single human said a thing. And I was like, okay, fine, that's fine. But that's an example of, sometimes you just want to feel seen.
But it's really interesting though, because I think, a lot of that is I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to say it. And even now I'm sensing, as I talked to you about, I'm sort of conscious of the words that I use. And so I can totally understand people's reaction there, but I can see completely. You come back and you just sort of go, it's obvious I've been away. People must know, right?
Yeah.
Well, particularly with you, it's like you're going to be noticed when you're not in the room, right? It's like you're not, with the greatest respect, you are not a wallflower that's going to sit there and sort of not be participating in the thing. So they kind of all know, and it's sort of like this awkward secret, which I guess makes things worse. But we don't teach people how to talk about this.
Yeah.
It's an awkward thing, best left undiscussed, because then we don't have to confront it.
Yeah. And I always like to name the elephant. One thing that I've discovered is that in Britain, we're particularly bad for it, though. Not just Britain, America, many Western countries treat death like it's. I was going to mention Voldemort, but I don't really like mentioning anything related to Harry Potter. They talk about death like it's something that cannot be named, something that cannot be discussed. Even the word morbid shouldn't be used. Talking about death is a part of life. Yeah, in our culture, particularly English culture, it's taboo. We're terrible with. So after my dad died, I read a lot of books about death, obviously, and burial and ritual and how other cultures approach death. And it's shocking how clinical we approach death and burial in this country. It's an industry and that's it. But there's other countries, places in Bolivia where families keep the skeletons of their loved ones in their houses, in their living rooms, and then every year they'll take the skeletons to a party and all the skeletons have a party. And that's your deceased family members still having a lovely time in the afterlife. Of course, they talk about death the entire time. Some cultures talk about death frequently while they're alive. They plan their funerals. It probably makes them live more. Appreciate living to an even greater extent. In this country, we're terrible. I don't know why. I don't know why we're so. I guess we don't talk about much stuff apart from the weather.
I want to take you back to something you pointed out earlier around the confusion and inability to think straight. And you posted something that I thought was really super helpful on LinkedIn about if you want to help someone, to give that advice here, because I just thought it was one of those things that the moment you pointed it out, I just went, that's so bloody obvious. And then I felt seen because I was like, well, I've done exactly the thing that you're telling people not to do. So give people that advice and explain it a little bit, because I thought it was just brilliantly practical, but also like it's just a great example of something you don't think about, but is kind of very sensible and obvious.
I think it's really important to give people advice when it comes to speaking to those experiencing grief, because everyone has the best of intentions. Everyone has the best of intentions, bar 0.00000% of people. I still got trolled the day after my dad died by some twat on LinkedIn. Like, some people are shits. Most people are gorgeous and lovely and kind and want to do the best for you. However, some people just say really unhelpful things during this time. One of those things is there anything I can do to help? Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. The cognitive load that question places on a griever is quite significant, because you have to go through all the different things that need to be done. Then you have to think, right, which of those am I going to give to this person? Then you need to think about the handover and how they're going to do that thing. And then you need to worry about if they say no. And so if I was like, someone said to me, is there anything that I can do to help? Yeah, come round and cook my dinner every single day for the next 2 weeks. Or, yeah, do all my meetings, do my sales for me, please. For the next 2 weeks, do my sales. It's a 60 grand a year job, probably. Do it for free, please. Like, no, it's not. You're not going to do that. And so the thing that I think, and this also applies to when people are depressed, when anyone's going through a hard time, think of the thing you can do. To be specific, and the person going through a hard time will just be so grateful for your existence. I had loads of people offering to make me food, like casseroles and pizzas and stuff, and bring them round. I had loads of people asking me if they could take me for a walk. I had loads of people asking if I wanted them to look after my dog, just really specific stuff. I also, things like, loads of people sent me books, because I talk about books all the time. I love books. I love reading. So many people sent me books, and books have been my escapism for the last few months. All of those little things, we didn't have to have a deep and meaningful, and we didn't have to have a long conversation about it, but all of those little things helped. So yeah, again, the advice, be as specific as you can, or just say, I love you. I love you. And I'm here to remind you of that every single day until you feel better.
I just love the way you framed that, because you're absolutely right. It's terrifying. If you go, what can I do to help? That's utterly, I mean, you could come up with something, it's your point, right? That I'm just going, I don't want to do that. I didn't mean that, right? I'm happy to do anything, but not that. And so actually, I love this idea of you then get to set the terms on which you help.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all been in situations where kind of like you get some task gets foisted on you and you go, I really don't want to, like, I thought the task was going to involve this and I was totally cool with that, but this is way beyond that. So I love that idea of, hate the phrase, taking back control, but gives you a degree of control as to what you can handle. Because I think there's nothing that I'm assuming in these situations, right? You need reliability at these points. So you want people that are under promising and over delivering, as opposed to just saying nice things.
Yeah. Yeah. Even just checking in regularly to say, how are you today, is enough. There tends to be, and again, there's no judgment, there tends to be a lot of mindless phrases used when someone's going through a hard time. So when someone dies, the immediate knee-jerk response is to say, I'm so sorry. And it's like, can't you say something else? Like, everyone's saying, I'm so sorry. Are you sorry? And I went, just be more interesting. But also, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Did you really think about those words, or did you just say them because that's what people say?
Do you know what? Actually, as you're talking, it's making me think that is exactly what you get is the AI response.
Yes.
Right. That's what AI would do, right? It's like give me something nice to say, right? And it would those are exactly the phrases
Yeah.
that would come out. Which your point is sort of like if the product of your attempt to be empathetic is
Mm.
something that ChatGPT could have put out there,
Yeah.
kind of suggests you're not being empathetic.
Yeah, totally. Also, there's a balance. It's really important, I think, to even whilst you're grieving, you don't want to be the main character of everyone's lives. Everyone else has got their own shit going on too. So I don't want to be too demanding about how people speak to me and how people are with me. But it is,
It's just quite regal. The Queen will not be spoken to except like
nah, but I'm thinking about doing an event on grief. I love doing events. I call them learning parties. I'm thinking about doing an event on grief and how to navigate experiencing it, how to navigate other people's grief. Also, what people do with grief is can be phenomenal and so creative and wonderful. There's a book I recommend for anyone who is grieving, written by Sarah Perry, called Death of an Ordinary Man. And she wrote it about her father-in-law who got a cancer diagnosis and then died 9 days later. And she was with him the entire time, every single one of those 9 days. And it's this very romantic, raw, painful account of the final 9 days of someone's life and every single element. There's no holds barred. It's the most beautiful book I've ever read. No. It's the most beautiful book I've ever read, and that came from grief. It came from grief. Amazing stuff can come from grief.
all of this is great. You should absolutely do that event, right? I can't think of anybody better placed. One, because you've been through it, but two, and it's annoying the hell out of me, by the way. Every time you organise an event I want to go to, I'm never around. But I'm determined. My 2026 ambition is to get to one of your events, and we'll put links to all of those things in the show notes. People can find out more about them. But yeah, you should totally do that. But I love this. What you're bringing to it is very much your lens on these things, right? It's your because you're somebody that's curious, and I mean that in every sense of the word. And
Mm.
what I love is you're deploying that curiosity on this experience that you've been through in a way to say, what can we learn from it? What happened? What's going on? And I think one of the challenges for lots of people is they don't want to do that. They don't want to go there. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily have that capacity, either the curiosity that gets them there or the mental capacity because they're doing a job or whatever it is. But because this is your life, I think it's really clear that you're bringing those skills that you bring to bear for other human experiences into this space.
Yeah, no, it's true.
My sense is you're not somebody that can switch that curiosity off, right? So it's not surprising that
Yeah.
we end up goes through the normal lens of you trying to make sense of it, right? And trying to explore what it means and how you're feeling about it and what we can learn from it.
There's a weird digression that I'm gonna take just for a second. I don't know if I told you about this before. I studied parapsychology at the University of Edinburgh a few years ago.
I think that was one of those things you mentioned, and I
Yeah.
thought I must go back to that, and then we got into other rabbit holes. So yeah, let's go
Yeah.
down that one.
So I studied parapsychology for a bit, which is the study of the supernatural, essentially, or the psychology of the supernatural, the study of extraordinary brains and people who believe they have extraordinary brains, and those who claim that they can predict the future in their dreams or they can read minds. There's an entire psychology to that. It's called anomalous psychology, but also quantum physicists study it as well. It's like like a really rich area there isn't massively recognized by the scientific community. But one of the lecturers said his reason for studying parapsychology, which is almost laughed at by psychologists and scientists, because it's like, what, you're studying ghosts? Grow up. Is I have one life. As far as I'm aware, because I don't have any proof to the contrary, I have one opportunity to learn as much as I can about this fucking baffling situation that we're all in. Why would I not want to know every single thing I possibly can? So yes, I study the supernatural. Yes, I study people that have really weird dreams and believe they can see ghosts. And I love that perspective. And I also share that perspective. I get one shot at this of being a human, which is a really cool thing. And everyone says, the odds of us being here in this situation right now are like 1 trillion to 1. I get one shot at this. So I am going to be curious about every single thing that I feel, every single thing that I can go through, that I go through in life. I want to make sense of it. I want to learn about it. I want to see how other people have done it, because surely that will make my experience richer.
It's back to that's the sort of thing we're allowed to do as kids, right? We can have sort of
Mm.
wild, crazy idea. And then slowly the education system and social norms beat that out of us.
Yeah.
Hopefully not actually, but in many cases that has happened. But it's kind of like we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And that's part of that. And I think that's an interesting thing, isn't it? You're taking that childlike curiosity and just deploying it in the adult world. And it's
Yeah.
joyous to watch, by the way. But I think it challenges that. There's some people find it really awkward, right? Which you know instinctively. You know that there's people out there going, well, you shouldn't be. It's sort of like it's almost like what you're doing is inappropriate, childish, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I do often get called, I think that it's really funny that I get called childlike a lot. I think because I don't have children, so I don't know, and I've never, I suppose I just, there's some people in life, some people are born old. You know, and
Yes.
they're 5 and they're planning.
Jacob Rees-Mogg for UK listeners would be a good example.
You
Right?
can't imagine him being a toddler, can you? That's insane. Yeah, and credit to my parents, have never lost my childlike sense of wonder about the world. I've never stopped playing. I've never stopped being silly. And I have to credit my parents for that. They gave me this space. They were both incredibly silly and allowed me to do that. Like, we laughed so much when we were together. And because they never forced me to grow up, they never forced me to get married, they never forced me to have kids, any of that jazz. They just allowed me to be me. Such an amazing gift that parents can give their kids, is allowing them to be themselves.
The other bit I love about when you talk and your philosophy is that I think about the phrase "fuck around to find out," right? And that's typically phrased negatively, right? Oh,
Yeah.
and it's typically men, right? He fucked around, he found out, right? So sort of negative. But I would absolutely describe what you do as that, but in a really positive sense, right?
Yeah.
It's playing around to see what happens. Very artistic logic, creative logic there. But you apply that, and and my sense is, if we look at the grief, you'll apply the same thing. It's like, well,
Mm.
why is this going on? And asking those awkward, childlike questions. And so I think, if I were trying to depict what you do, I think there is a lot of fucking around to find out.
This is genius. You've given me an idea. I'm gonna you fuck around and find out is gonna be the name of my next product. You're a genius.
I
I've been
can't.
working on this thing. Yeah, I won't say what it is, but I've been working on this thing, which is like a bit immersive, a bit different about learning. And you've just given it the perfect name.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
The
Have you
power of
did you see
conversations.
Yeah, Donald Trump. Did you see he tweeted "fuck around and find out" the other day about
I
Venezuela?
can't. It's
Well, it's FAFO, isn't it? The acronym FAFO. He just tweeted a picture of himself and the acronym FAFO. And it's like, Jesus Christ, that's the leader of the free world.
when you talk about things, it's kind of on the one hand, we're seeing social norms challenged all the time, right? That would be a really good illustration. And I'm not saying that's not necessarily always a good thing, but
Mm.
we're in an era where that's happening. And I find it really, really interesting that on the one hand, we sort of acknowledge that, and the Overton window for fucking is definitely expanding.
Mm.
And yet you're fighting quite a lot of forces. There's quite a lot of resistance to it as well. Where I think we're more open to new experiments and new ideas. And yet there are those kind of conservative elements that want to constrain us. And this is why I love seeing your stuff online. Is you push away those edges, and I can see the people resisting you. You're exposing a lot of those hidden things. And so
Mhm.
in some respects, I guess you're putting yourself out there a little bit, knowing that you're going to be a target.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I'm immune to it now. And there's something really nice. There's something really nice about winding people up. I However, I was thinking about this. I've been thinking about this week. And I read a paper yesterday about AI and communication, and the likelihood that if you use AI frequently, you're losing your voice. Your voice will be changing. Your style of communication will be becoming more formulaic. There's a huge likelihood of that occurring. And also, your cognitive function, if you're using it all the time, will be declining. I think lots of people are very happy with that. They're fine with that because I think a lot of people really struggle with being human beings. And that's a weird thing to say, but we're just these emotional, crazy beasts. And some people just don't like that. They want to be a robot. I think if you gave a lot of people an option, do you just wanna be a fucking machine and sit and do the same thing every day? A lot of people would be like, "Yeah, you know what? Yes. Yes." Because some people find even the idea of being a chaotic, creative human just too hard.
I mean, that must be true, right? Because if you look at some of the jobs that certain people do, and there are some people that don't have a choice, but if you
Yeah.
look at people that do have a choice, you sort of go, why would you choose?
Yeah.
And I think it's because it provides stability and structure and certainty
Yeah.
in a world that generally doesn't offer that, right? So I can see the attraction of it, but man, that would be done. And historically, we've needed people to do those roles. So
Yeah.
the system functions partly because there are people willing to do that. But I think you make a really interesting point. And I was thinking about the AI bit. I mean, if we look at map reading, for example, or just
Mm.
orientation, that's not a skill that lots of people are developing now because you don't need it, right? You look at the
Yeah.
little dot on the map. And I'm kind of relieved sometimes where I go, at least I understand how a compass works. Right, and I can sort of recognize where the little dot might not be in the right place because I've got those other skills.
Well, do you remember in the days of yore, we used to memorize people's phone numbers?
Yes.
Human memory, hate to make a really grandiose a grandiose statement, but human memory is shot to shit. There was a study conducted on the relationship between increased digital usage during COVID, which was across the board, everyone used digital more, and memory, our capacity to remember. And the more we use digital tools, the worse our memory gets. Memory, of course, doesn't really matter. It doesn't hugely matter how much you can remember until you're old, and then it can cause terrible problems. I know we're going massively off topic, although really we are coming full circle. There's going to be h- another dementia pandemic for this generation because of AI, because capacity to think and remember. There's studies like neuroscientists are releasing studies before they've even been peer reviewed because they're like, we need to fucking get this out now because people are using AI instead of thinking and it's destroying their cognitive capabilities. Like there's a real emergency, a sense of urgency amongst neuroscientists and psychologists because our brains are going to be destroyed by the lack of thinking that we're about to do over the next 10 years.
Terrifying thoughts. I want to bring us. You talked about coming full circle. I
Yeah.
want to pick up one other theme that's very you, which is your. And again, I love the construct here, but your word of the year you have declared at the beginning of the year, which I thought was a remarkable because normally it's like, let's see what's happened this year. We will have the date. We'll have something that reflects what has happened. Your word of the year, and I'll let you reveal it, is forward looking. And so, firstly, I love the construct, but secondly, I love the choice. Tell us about it.
My word of 2026 is shameless because, first of all, there's all these words that we've accepted are bad, but shameless, i.e., to be free of shame, it's in theory, it's not that bad. I would quite happily live without shame for the rest of my life. Oh God, I just knocked loads of stuff off my desk. I would quite happily live without shame for my entire life. But for some reason, being shameless is seen as a terrible thing for a human to be. I also do need to be shameless, honestly. I have spent the last couple of years not really promoting what I do, not really selling what I do because I don't want people to be pissed off. And now I'm like, I don't fucking care. I don't care. There's a really wonderful thing that comes from losing a loved one, especially a loved one that you held so dear, is you give less shits about everything. I don't care what people think about. It's so unimportant what random people think of me, or whether people think I'm selling too much, or whether people think I'm an attention seeker. I've been thinking a lot about the deathbed, and my dad was perfectly able to lie on his deathbed and know that he'd done a good job. He had been a sterling citizen, like a really good man, and he, I hope, had no regrets. He didn't care what people thought about him, as if he gave a shit. He didn't massively use social media either, though, but, I want to get to my deathbed and think that I didn't allow anybody's opinions or concerns about me to dictate how I behaved, and that's why Shameless was so important for me this year, albeit extreme. I want to, we've talked a bit about authenticity. I want to be as authentic and as me as I can, because I wanna die knowing that I was myself the whole time.
And it makes perfect sense, particularly for what you do, which is if people don't like you, they're not going to buy your services anyway. Right?
No.
I mean, you'd be an idiot, right? To ask something to one of your things. I can't
Yeah.
stand her, right? But I can't, because that's what you're buying. And so I love this idea of kind of doubling down into being who you are, because sure, it's going to repel some people,
Mm.
but that's fine, right? Because they're not your tribe anyway.
Yeah.
And so I quite like it as a sort of selection mechanism, in that you're going to do a better job with people that want to be there, that know exactly what they're, no one's under any illusion what they're buying with you, because the product and the marketing are aligned, right? There's no point, there's no sort of this isn't washing powder that doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do, right? This is
Yeah.
unashamedly, back to that word, right? It's unashamedly you. And so I love that philosophy. I mean, it's really hard to do for most people, but I think there's something really powerful about knowing who you are and what you stand for and not caring what other people think.
It also applies to Good Shout has staff, and we have a bunch of facilitators, and we're always getting people approach us. It's also a really nice way to attract the right people. All of the people that work for Good Shout are so remarkably different in their personalities. Like, they could be, we have a bunch of people that are just I don't wanna call them misfits, but they're misfits in the sense that they're all very, very individual. Totally different to me. Every single person that works for Good Shout is completely different to me, but that's the brilliant thing, is that we're almost just united by this love of authenticity, and that's great. And also a love of authenticity, but also a lack of judgment for most other humans.
And have you had any pushback on the shameless thing? Because I could imagine people sort of, it's the kind of word, back to your point, and this is why it's so powerful, right? But it's the kind of word that will provoke a reaction. Have you had any pushback on it?
I don't think people give me that much pushback anymore in
'Cause
public. In public, I think people, if they've been following me for a while, I think they know what happened. They see what happened.
I was thinking about it more in the context of sort of context collapse, i.e., where your content goes because somebody's liked it, it gets thrown around by the algorithm. I would
Yeah.
imagine so I could see yours landing in places where people generally willfully misunderstand, but occasionally genuinely misunderstand what it's all about.
No one has. But also, I, as a woman, have noticed a decreasing reach on LinkedIn. Everyone's been talking about that lately, and I haven't really talked about it much because I don't want to obsess over algorithms. Like, I do have better shit to think about, but I have noticed a far lower reach than I had maybe a year ago. And it's not that I'm talking about drastically different stuff. And I am thinking about changing my gender on LinkedIn. There was that phase when everyone was doing that. Women were doing that. They were changing themselves to a man to see if their reach increased, and it always did. I'm thinking about doing that just to see. I don't massively end up in either, well, I didn't with the word shameless anyway. I got zero pushback. But I would imagine there's a whole host of people that screen grab my posts and paste them into WhatsApp chats and say, fucking look at her now. Ugh. Ugh, isn't she awful? She's done it again. And I'm like, yeah. You're giving
But
me
that's having an impact. I love that, right? Because it's having an
Yeah.
impact, right? Isn't
Yeah.
it? It's like, and who cares what they think anyway? But I sort of sit there and go, if you're landing with people, and we don't want to set out to deliberately offend people or upset them or any of those kind. And there's things to be sensitive about. But I think bottom line, I love it because you're having an impact. And back to the whole topic of that we started on, right? Is you want to leave this place having left your mark on it in some way, shape, or form, because otherwise you're just sort of moseying through life. And I think that's the key bit here is, this making the most of the opportunities that we have while we're here. And you don't do that by not being the true version of yourself, because you're spending half your time worrying that, the cognitive load of faking it is
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah. And I think there was an Australian palliative care nurse who maybe she either released a book or an article about what people say on their deathbed. And there's 5 things that people always say. I wish I'd spent more time with my friends and family. I wish I'd been to more countries. One of the top things is I wish I'd been myself. That's one of the biggest regrets that people have on their deathbed. We don't talk about deathbeds enough, so that's why I would imagine so many people have that regret. But wouldn't it be wonderful if you could look ahead, if more people could look ahead and think, shit, what am I gonna, I've started calling it deathbed economics. Working out the likelihood of regretting or not regretting something on your deathbed and then making a decision about whether you do it or not.
I love that because it's the ultimate in long-term thinking,
Yeah.
right? And actually a lot of the problems that we have is that short-term, whether that's adrenaline rushes or whatever that we get where we find things to distract us. Actually, that's the perfect framing, I think, for longer term thinking, which generally I have found if one thinks longer term, you get better decisions. Not
Yeah.
always. Sometimes we have to do short term stupid things that we regret to learn from them. But
Yeah.
love that. Amazing. Amy, as ever, we could keep talking and I would love to have you back on the show as your voyage continues because you're always like full of, literally, might sound ironic given the topic we've talked about, full of life, full of energy, full of amazing ideas, and above all, unashamedly you. And I just want to encourage you to keep doing that. Thank you so much for being a massive inspiration to me. I look forward to seeing how Fuck Around, Find Out, and all the other projects that you're involved in with that. We'll put links to all of those things in the show notes, plus the books that you've recommended. But I want to say 2 things. One is thank you for coming and talking about a really, really important subject and for being willing to do that. I think a lot of people will have learned from it. But secondly, just thank you generally for being you because you're amazing. I'm so pleased. I don't know how I found you on LinkedIn, but I'm so pleased I did. But above all, thank you for being an incredible guest on the show again.
Oh, thank you for the most amazing conversation. I love all the different directions that we go into. And I can't even remember what we talked about. So
I'll have to remind myself for when I record the intro, but I'll find out and I'll let you know.
Oh shit, my memory. That's my memory screwed as well.
Love it. Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to you for listening, and of course to Amy for appearing and being so willing to talk openly about a subject that's not always easy, but I think is really important. I hope you managed to take something from it. So whether you're currently experiencing grief, someone else that is, or just want to be prepared for when the inevitable happens, I hope you found it helpful. To find out more about the things that we talked about, including the book that Amy mentioned and her previous appearance on the show, have a look in the show notes. You'll find links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, where have you been? But thank you so much for listening. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It is available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review for it, please do so wherever you download it. It really, really does help. I will be back very soon with another episode of the show. But in the meantime, stay safe. I hope you'll take Amy's advice that calling out the elephant in the room can sometimes be the best strategy. Maybe it'll help you find the courage to have a conversation that you wouldn't otherwise have had. As I mentioned at the start of this episode, it's dedicated to Amy's dad, Lord Terence Kean. Rest in peace, sir. I'm Christian, and that was the Human Risk Podcast.